And I always had some kind of complex that I was not, you know, maybe born in. How do I play this music being a, white boy from a village in Bavaria?
Oh yeah.
Uh, and then I realized it took me many years that I'm never gonna be that boy who grew up in Harlem and soaked it up with, the mother's milk, so to say. And I thought, yeah, maybe actually it's interesting for the audience to listen to something through that prism. How does a music sound from a boy from Bavaria playing this music? Maybe that's the interesting
Mm.
point, and I embraced it more. Hello, hi.
Hi, Tobias. It's so great to meet you here on Zoom.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
It's a great pleasure. And you are in New York?
Exactly. I'm in Brooklyn, New York. Yeah, right now the weather is it's very early, but it's very dark outside, which is unusual for New York. Usually it's always blue skies. I hope it's
Oh,
fine
really?
with the light in the back, or should I turn it off? Or does
No,
it
that's
look
fine.
okay?
It's not disturbing, no.
Okay,
But
perfect.
yeah, it's I've never been to New York, but if you say
Oh.
there's a lot of blue skies, then it's good to be in New York, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's good. It can get really, really cold, but it's nice that it's always blue and sunny, usually. I'm from Bavaria, and there it's always very foggy. So I grew up very with like in the winter you couldn't see the sky for many months. So that's a positive change.
Yeah. But what brought you to New York from Bavaria?
Music.
Music.
Music, yeah, 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 for sure. So I studied here and I wanted to be close to my musical idols and take lessons with them. That was already now 15 years ago.
Really?
Hmm.
Yeah, because you're a saxophonist.
Yeah, exactly. Hmm.
Yeah, and you play mostly jazz, so I can understand that New York is the jazz hub probably.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the mecca of jazz still. Yeah, yeah. I mean, people, even some students of mine here, they always say, "Isn't it New Orleans?" But yeah, it was the birthplace there, but then it moved to first Chicago and then New York. Yeah.
But in Bavaria, what was the inspiration to play the saxophone?
It was my grandfather. He was a mostly classical bassist, bass player, but then happened the war, obviously, and after the war, there were stationed all the Americans in Bavaria. There were a lot of clubs, and they needed musicians, and they would tell him, "You music." He said, "Yeah, I'm music." Okay, and that's how he learned jazz. So and then he played with very famous people who toured through Germany or Europe. They sometimes just picked up musicians on the way to not bring the whole American band over. So he got to play, I think he played even once with Ella Fitzgerald or something. And
Wow.
that's how he learned jazz. And yeah, he was very he always said he was very lucky thanks through music that people could I found that always very fascinating that through music people could connect right away even after a war which was so horrible. He said when we played music it was immediately forgotten, you just could connect through the music. I find that very powerful of music and beautiful.
Well, I remember my dad talked about he was in Dresden during the war. He was a child,
Oh,
and
wow.
he also mentioned a few times that even in these bombed cities, it was always the musicians. It was always the people then playing, or it was always musicians coming together. So that was his childhood, that was his memory from those times. So it is true
Yeah.
what you're saying. Yeah.
I think that's one of my favorite things about music, that you can connect with so many people from all ages. Also, I always enjoyed that, playing very young with someone who was in their 80s or something, and it did completely didn't matter. It was more like you could learn a lot from person with more experience, and that respect. And now in my band, of course, also New York is a melting pot with people from all over the world. And in my band now, here is pianist from Israel. And when we go to Germany, it's almost the same in a way, when he told me the first tours he felt, I mean, he felt strange feelings because his one side of the family is from Hamburg and they got deported and died in the concentration camps. So it's like his grandfathers, but still it was very. And then to play music with him only like after a few generations later, and make music, it's very special for me, and it was very very nice.
Yeah, it just shows you how that you know breaks these boundaries, and suddenly the feeling is there from him, but then the moment he connects through music, then it's almost as if he doesn't think about that.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
and it's almost in a way joyful that you can come back and make beautiful music together with people who did that to your ancestors or something. I think
Exactly.
this is,
Mm.
yeah,
This is actually, I haven't thought of that, but how wonderful that music can do that. And um you hear that also in orchestras, people from different backgrounds, from different cultures coming together and doing the one thing that you know the universal language of music.
yeah. I sometimes, maybe I'm naive in that sense, but I always feel like if you could bring those, aggressors together and play some beautiful classical music for them and just make them listen together to that music. I wonder if they still could, you know, do those
Yeah,
atrocities after. I mean, what you said is true. I think there's Daniel Barenboim has or had this orchestra where he had half Israeli and half Palestinians and make music together. And well, also I feel like that's one of the ways you could maybe solve some of
exactly.
the
Yeah,
the
but
problems.
yeah, I spoke to a conductor once who conducts a youth orchestra, and he said that we think of orchestra, you think of the music, but actually orchestra and youth orchestra, there's so many other things like the bringing the children together, playing with each other, playing from two people playing from of two musicians playing from the same book. It's like it's that all these little things and having the same sort of goal. And you think of all these things that's aside from the music is the one
Yeah.
thing, but all the other things that's around the music, that it's really a pity that more schools don't incorporate music in
Yes.
syllabus.
Yeah, totally. I totally see that. I mean, that's besides my grandfather, then I went to a school where there was luckily a nice music program with big bands and stuff, and I got already there. We traveled to Russia and to Brazil even. You got all these trips, and I felt like, oh, how about, I mean, that would be so cool to do that for a living.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was nice.
But what I always find so fascinating from musicians is what specifically the instrument, what make you drawn to the instrument.
Yeah. Often they say the instrument chooses you and you don't choose the
Yeah,
instrument. Um, so I first started on the drums actually, to maybe not to the pleasure of my parents, but I was never really so serious. I played, but it was not, love and of the instrument. But then I went to all these big band concerts where my grandfather took me, and somehow big band was very there were a lot of big band concerts, and the first row, even Blasmusik in those beer tents or something, you had always in the first row were usually the saxophones, especially for big bands, and I could only see so far, so it was very visual. I was like a kid, and I would see the first row and all these blinking. It was very visual, mo um, reason. And the saxophone players would always stand up and have a solo, and then everyone would clap. And I thought, wow, that must feel so cool to get to do this. So it was, yeah, it was very visual at the beginning. And then I finally got a saxophone, and then of course I also fell in love with how to play it, with the sound it made, with the first people I heard, famous saxophone players who play that instrument, and I was, oh, that sound, I want to try to get that. And it took me a long time to figure it out. But the first thing was visual.
And was it easy to find a teacher for a saxophone?
Yeah, there were teachers around. Also, thanks to my grandfather, he connected me with teachers, and I was always lucky to have good teachers. And then through, of course, I wanted to study at a university, and I picked out the professors. I went to Switzerland to study there with an amazing saxophone player, Domenic Landolf. He's really not on the business map of somehow, I feel like it's always two jobs. You have the business and the music side, but he's just an incredible musician and saxophone player. Unfortunately, not so many people know him. And then I went to Amsterdam to study there, and then I went to New York to study here.
That seems to be the thing that musicians do, find a professor where they want to go and study, and then sort of go the route then.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And then jazz. Did you initially play classical saxophone?
I think also from the instrument, the saxophone is a very young instrument. So there is not even so much classical literature for saxophone. There is, of course, but it was always like the instrument for jazz. So I still practice Bach etudes, the cello etudes on the saxophone, which is beautiful, but I never really only studied classical music. Was more like secondary, and I actually love it a lot to open up new doors, but just also for the lack of clarinet, for example. I also play clarinet. There is a much longer history in the classical repertoire for clarinet than for saxophone.
If I can remember correctly, I spoke to a musician, but this was a saxophone player, was also a while ago, but you get two different kinds of saxophone, isn't it?
Almost, yeah. It's most importantly is the mouthpiece. That's the most that makes a sound. So saxophone, yeah, it's nice, but it doesn't matter so much. So you have a classical mouthpiece and a mouthpiece for jazz. So it's very hard to do either way on the other mouthpiece.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, to get into New York, I mean, it's a big city, and to get into the music scene, was that difficult?
Yes, I think it's very, very difficult, but I always like that about it. I like I love the challenge. I think there's something to it to be uh not the how you say the big fish in a small pond, but the opposite, that
Okay.
no one loves, no one knows you. I think that's very healthy for a musician, because otherwise and I had those experiences in a smaller town or something. You get all the gigs right away. Everyone wants to play with you, and then you get to New York and no one cares. And I think that's very good for your ego to stay humble and to keep studying, and just to see there's always, no matter at what level you are, there's someone who is going to be better, or there's going to come this young kid who is going to play. So that also helps you find it sounds very cliche, but to find your own voice. I always thought it's very cliche, but there are so many good musicians. I read somewhere there's 20,000 saxophone players in New York.
Wow.
Probably that's also, hobby amateur saxophone players, but just the sheer number, just trying to be only good is not enough, or just playing your instrument good. You have to have something special. For a while, I didn't want to have anything to do with my roots. I felt like I want to speak perfect English, no accent, and learn the tradition of jazz, which is an American art form. And I always had some kind of complex that I was not, maybe born in. How do I play this music being a, white boy from a village in Bavaria?
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and then I realized it took me many years that I'm never gonna be that boy who grew up in Harlem and soaked it up with, the mother's milk, so to say. And I thought, yeah, maybe actually it's interesting for the audience to listen to something through that prism. How does a music sound from a boy from Bavaria playing this music? Maybe that's the interesting point, and I embraced it more. Same with even the accent and stuff. When people say, "Oh," after one word, "Oh, where are you from?" I hear an accent. I say, "What do you mean? I just said hello." You know, I don't have. And then I would say, "No, no, no, don't get me." We love that, and they would be.
Yeah.
It would open doors to conversations. That no, oh, and I had friends from Germany, or it would always be an opening door, and I was not trying to hide it anymore. That was a very long answer. I'm
No,
sorry.
but it's so interesting. But the accent part, my dad, well, he went to South Africa when he was only a child. That was after the war. I think he was 12 years old, but he still has the German accent. So can you
Mm.
imagine all these years, and he sounds very much, speaking Afrikaans with a German accent, but. So I can understand he doesn't have to say a lot of words for people to understand that it's not from there. But that's true. And I don't know if it's the same thing, but actually I spoke to a flamenco dancer from Slovenia yesterday,
Mm.
and we talked about this thing that sometimes it's the outsider of something, of say, so he's really the outsider of the flamenco, that he can do something different, or he can bring something different to it than the maybe somebody from Spain who grew up with it and who knows the hard tradition of it. So he can do something else, and this is what you're saying now. You bring something else to the table.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's very fascinating topic. I wonder what he would say. Did he go to Spain though to study the tradition, or he was never there, or what did he think about that?
I think he went to Spain for a while, but he's developed his own style. He's mixing contemporary and he was talking about the fact that for him it's easy to do that because he's not stuck in this tradition. He can
Mm.
experiment more because there's no boundaries for him. He's not stuck in that. Where I think if you do, if you know the tradition and if you're in the tradition, I think it's sometimes difficult um, to go a little bit outside of the norm.
Yeah, I can see that also for being true, maybe for the music I make. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I do think we talk about roots now, and I've had a few uh, interviews where it ends up people talking about the roots, and finding their roots, or that the roots have some sort of influence. So I think definitely that makes somebody interesting, where they come from and how they do something in a certain way, because I do think our roots do affect how we see the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it doesn't mean you have then to play Bavarian polka or something. I think it comes through in
Exactly.
other ways, It doesn't have to be so literal.
Mm. But you said now it's a cliche that you find your voice, but this is also something that I hear a lot, and where musicians or artists go through a phase where they try to find their place, really. What is it that I want to say, and so on. So now that you've discovered it, can you see a difference in how you play, or how you approach other musicians
Yeah.
in this?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a lifelong process and it always morphs, and you can never say that's done. I completely found my voice, or maybe you can. I'm not sure, but I would say I'm still in the process. But I feel like I feel more free. I don't have to prove myself anymore that I can play uh, that music. Before, maybe my albums or something were always. Now that I look at it in later, maybe trying to prove that I can play jazz. You know what I mean? And now I feel like I can, and I don't have to prove that anymore. I can be more open to other influences. I love a lot of other music, if singer-songwriter, classical, or and it can all come together in the music I make. I don't have, I have less boundaries to explore myself.
Jazz is very much so about improvisation, and getting together with different musicians. Does that also affect how you play?
Yeah, I mean, you play different with anyone you play, and you constantly meet new people. And I mean, I was always a little between naive and fearless. It was like I always liked just to approach my heroes and say, I want to play with you. Even they would be way better than me, and sometimes probably that was stupid, but because it was very obvious then. But I think that made me learn a lot and grow. So and jazz allows that to do. You can really mm, play with anyone in some sense if they are open to it. But I think jazz, because of the jam session culture, that you can go every night here in New York to a jam session until 2 3 in the morning, which I did a lot when I came here, and play with anyone. So it's part of the culture to really get together and all the time figure out new things. And I think that you can hear that in a lot of projects that people do, that they invite this person, invite this person. Oh, I want to play with this person for one song. And yeah, I found that always very refreshing. It's not stuck into one band for 20 years and you only play with those three
Yeah.
people for 20 years.
But it's almost that conversation that you feel the musicians have when they are, it's almost as if uh, sometimes you get the feeling they're in their own little bubble or their own little world there on the stage or where they're playing, and that makes
Yeah.
it so interesting for the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I I mean, my grandfather is a musician, but my parents then they are from the medicine. My dad is a doctor, and my mom a pharmacist, and there it was very much said that I would go that route. I already had like um, a place to study medicine, but I had to wait a couple of years to get into that school. It was like the normal thing. And I said, okay, I'm gonna study music for 1 year or 2 years, and then I know it. And then I can do something else because that's enough, right? Uh, and of course, the more you go in any topic, you see it's never ending, right? There's always more layers, always more layers. And I still discover that if you listen to an album, you can still discover new things. The more, even as a listener, as an audience, the more you listen to one type of music, the more you discover. Or with a painting, you can look at a painting for so many hours, seen it 100 times, and then you discover something new. Maybe someone told you something, or yeah. And I discover new things playing with musicians. I feel like now I hear different, and I feel like the listening aspect is of a new aspect I'm exploring right now to listen more. I started taking lessons with a master teacher, and he told me, "Do you want to be a listener who plays or a player who listens?" Something like that, but just something very deep. I couldn't say it as good, but just to be more listening deeply. I think that's what I want to say.
Yeah, but that's also that probably, I mean, I'm not a musician, but this is what I hear from jazz musicians is that you really have to be in tune with your colleagues, playing or in a band. So you really have to feed off each other. So you have to be aware of what they're doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you said now that you listen to music and you find that that you hear different things. Do you have music that you listened as a child or that you listened when you were younger, that you really your idol?
Yeah. Uh-huh. I mean, I was younger. I feel like, I mean, we're talking now teenage years, and I go back to that. It's really the old school saxophone players like Ben Webster or Coleman Hawkins. They have this very, I mean, especially Ben Webster has this very warm quality. And I still cannot really find that in someone playing now. It was very, very special. And even because there were no jazz schools back then, they well studied maybe classical in a classic conservatorium, and then they learned jazz on the streets. And now it became very, you said that word academy, you you go to university, it became very intellectual in a way. And I feel sometimes you can hear that in the music. And that's maybe a little problem of jazz sometimes. It became often, that's maybe made it less popular, often a little bit too intellectual, I think. And if you listen to those old players, it has all this emotional warmth, and it makes you feel, at least me, it always made me feel warm, almost like a hug. And I feel fascinated by that. And also nowadays, often younger, and me included, we want to sound like that person. We have one idol, like more modern players, we would transcribe, and it is almost a compliment to be like, oh, you sound like, I don't know,
Oh, I
Mark
see.
Turner. And back then I realized it was an insult almost, because you don't want to sound like someone else. You want sound, oh, after one song, oh, that's Tobias. That's,
Oh, yeah.
rather than and risking sometimes maybe to sound maybe not good in the sense, or that people immediately say, oh, we know that it might sound different. Like Thelonious Monk is a good example. Now he's considered a genius, but they were furious at the beginning, or even Coltrane. They would boo at him in concerts because he was trying out new things, and it was way more the culture of jazz back then, I think, to try new things and be unafraid. And now everyone is so afraid, and it's so constitutionalized. That was the word, a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I spoke to Paul Jenkins, a jazz musician also in the UK, and we talked about this thing where he said that, originally these musicians, they played from the soul, they played from raw emotion, and
Yes.
you can feel it. So, and most of them didn't have any education, music education, they just, it came from within.
Yeah. And then of course I get drawn to people nowadays who are still alive and make music, who have kind of the to combine the two worlds. They have the education and they can do all these musical tricks or have everything, but they choose maybe not to, and they have still that emotional quality to their playing. It's still there, and there are obviously a lot of musicians, or maybe not. Uh, there are musicians who do that. And those are the ones I really admire nowadays.
But do you experiment on your own as well? I mean, do you?
Yeah, of course, I try to be open. And for example, there's a thing called multiphonics, where you can make two or three sounds with harmonics on the saxophone, because usually you can only play one song. And Coltrane experimented with that a little bit, and in the free jazz world, but it's not really um, uh, used in composition very much. And so that's one thing I'm exploring. And I wrote a couple of songs that have that. And I feel like that's kind of a jumping off board for me to not fall into the traps of, conventionalism. Uh, be more open, using different things to get me open and fresh. Or singing, I discovered that connects me very much to emotion, even if I'm not a singer, by composing and being vulnerable. Yeah, I even put one song on my album where I sing, even I'm not trained, and just being open to that. I feel like just makes me play different. And yeah, that's maybe the last thing. I always felt I want actually my saxophone to be just an extension of my voice, to play like a singer, rather than, just notes.
That's so interesting now that you say that, because coming back to the flamenco artist, he said that his feet is his voice. That
Huh.
yeah, and it's so interesting.
Wow. Yeah,
I
it's
do
all
get that.
coming
Yeah,
together.
I do get that sometimes where I speak to two or three people after each other, and it's sort of, you can draw the lines, and people say things that I can sort of, you can put together. So it's very interesting. But it's it's wonderful that you sing, that you have that, feel that freedom to be able to sing as well, and that you now saying you don't have the singing sort of education, but you think always it is necessary to have that. If you have that feeling and it comes from within, that you just do it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So your compositions and the writing that you do, what inspires you?
That's a very good question. Many things. I wrote my latest album with the New York band is influenced by painting, so that's called The Painter. Yeah, I find abstract painting very interesting, and I feel like it goes very closely, the painting world goes very closely together with the music world. It's often can be abstract, it can be literal. And there's also this thing called synesthesia. I don't know if you heard about that. This is when people um, see music in colors. They say, "Oh, that song sounds
Yeah.
blue," or that note sometimes very specific. The C is blue, the D is red, and they see really images. I was very fascinated by that. It's just a neurological thing, and I did my thesis in university on synesthesia, and that I found very very fascinating. And then in a way, I mean, at least me, when I close my eyes and listen to music, I kind of see like pictures, maybe not as literal. I think we all have that quality. If you just something comes to mind, I mean, it's rarely just black, you know. If you listen, something is gonna come up. And even if I play music, I hear things, and I let that. I was more open to that while composing. So. Yeah, and also that multiphonic thing, I think it's very, it reminded me of abstract painting because it sounds very abstract. And even in art before Impressionism, or I think the painters influenced the musician and vice versa. It happened a lot before. Uh, exactly. And the new album, which I just finished, I thought, how about doing the same with uh, write authors and poets? So I
Oh,
would take a poet and then put music to it, and maybe then not even show the poet, but that's how the inspiration came, or have someone sing the poet. So for example, I did a Rilke poem, the Panther. Uh, and then I had a Portuguese singer sing it, and we translated it in Portuguese. So it kind of you see it through a prism, um, or yeah, there's this Argentinian poet. I have one beautiful poet by her, Silencio, and I wrote music to that poet, a poem. Yeah, so
but this is so interesting because there's a professor in South Africa who did a study on uh, he took a few people to do paintings, and he gave them songs to listen to, but they didn't understand the lyrics. So it was languages that they didn't understand, and he wanted to see if you don't understand music or you don't understand the lyrics, if you can still have a perception of what it's all about. And every painting was spot on the meaning of the poem, even though the people couldn't, or the meaning of the song, even though the people couldn't understand the lyrics. And this,
wow, I did.
yeah, yeah,
Wow, that's cool. I didn't know that. That's
yeah. So that's
huh.
interesting that you say now that somebody sang it in Portuguese, and that and you put the music, and I'm sure the audience that listens to it will understand the feeling with your music and the lyrics as well.
Yeah. Wow. I have to think about that.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's wonderful that you find your way in New York, and I'm always thinking it's for me so interesting. Musicians, you have those two sides. You have to be practicing a lot alone, but then you have also the side where you have to be with other musicians to be able to fulfill this thing that you're doing. So do you find those both things easy, or do you struggle being alone?
I would say the opposite.
Oh, is it?
I always loved practicing and being alone and explore. I feel there's no one bothering my energy. But then when you go to, interact socially, of course, once you found your band, that's why I chose my band musicians. It feels the same. I feel very happy to see them and making music. But if you are out in the world, there's always, you crash with different
Oh, yeah.
energies, egos, and that can be sometimes challenging. And especially, I think sometimes we struggle because we spend so much time alone. It can be hard then to be immediately, surrounded by so many energies and having to deal with that. And sometimes you feel that in musicians, that we are not immediately so socially quick. I mean, I want to be always mindful of that when interacting with someone, and I notice it's sometimes in musician that I feel like, oh, maybe that person just was practicing for a week straight and it takes some time, or but I actually never thought about it, so how you put it together, but it makes a lot of sense that is, I'm sure, pretty tricky in the musician's world. For any artist, probably an artist just spends a lot of time alone, and then having to explain it or something is often sometimes very, very hard.
Yeah, but you find painters, they can be on their own and they can paint and they can,
True.
that's it. They don't need to be with other people. But with musicians, it's a different way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe painting is one of the few art forms where you can do that. I'm just reading the memoir of Werner Herzog, and I found him very interesting in that way too. He's a very special, crazy, crazy guy, but he would go for weeks on walks by himself, all alone through whole Europe, and be really isolated and has ideas and writes, and then he has to direct a movie with 500 thousands of people, and I feel like, yeah, I
Well,
think
I
people
thought about this also during lockdown because two of my children are ballet dancers, and I realized
wow.
suddenly that they they struggle being alone, because with dancers they're always with somebody. You're always dancing.
Yeah,
I'm not saying with solo, you're doing solo projects, but usually dancers are always feeding off each other and they're always together and they're always in the studio together. And then I also realized with musicians, were not always so phased about the situation because they could carry on and they could practice and play a repertoire that they wanted to play. So they could almost survive in that setting. Whereas with
yeah,
dance, I find it was, very much claustrophobic for them.
yeah, I can imagine that.
Mhm.
Wow, yeah.
But tell me, Tobias, what are still the wishes for you for the future?
Say it again, and
What are
I
the
didn't.
wishes for you for the future?
Oh, wow, that's a deep one. I mean, I want to connect with as many people through music or not through music and traveling and discover new places in the world. I really enjoy that we didn't talk so much that with music you can travel a lot and meet new people and different cultures. So I've never been to Japan. We just played in South Korea last year, and that was eye-opening. Just I would love to travel even more with my music, and
How
yeah,
about
and
South
then
Africa? You can
yes. Actually,
yeah,
I'm in contact with some great. I'm playing on an album of a South African musician, but
really?
it was just through. I recorded my part and sent it
Oh,
to him.
okay.
We never actually met in person, so we are
Gosh,
talking about coming there. And I played in Switzerland. They have a very strong connection in Basel. They bring a lot of people from South Africa, and I play with South African musicians, amazing musicians, really, really great musicians. So we always wanted to make it happen, and we are in the talks. And luckily, there are some institutions in Germany, the Goethe Institute, and some others. They always helped us travel. So I'm very positive to make that happen. I'll let you know, and I
let
ask
me
for
know. Let me know,
yeah.
definitely. Oh, that would be great if you do that. Yeah, I know it's this is also what me and Paul Jenkins talked about is Africa being sort of the root of jazz, those traditional music, was really the ground or the starting point of what jazz is today.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, I also have an invitation to go to Ghana, which gets me
Wow.
very excited. Yeah, I feel like it's almost like an obligation as a jazz musician to, uh, go there and connect and, soak up a little bit from the
Yeah.
traditional music.
But tell me, just what do you miss from Bavaria when you're there in New York? Or are you already a New Yorker?
No, no, no. I go there still a lot also to play music and see my family. No, good beer, I would say. That's really hard to find here in that style. Mostly the food, good knödel. Like I mean, I started in the pandemic to make them myself because I have not found any place which has, for example, knödel. It doesn't exist in New York. And you
Yeah.
can survive without them. It's fine. But that I always have my mom make me that when I
Oh,
go
really?
home. Yeah.
Yeah, I also have things. I've been out of South Africa for so long now, but there's certain things that
What,
that
for example? What's some typical food from there?
well, braaivleis, which is
Uh-huh.
our type of barbecue, and then around that there's a lot of little dishes and things that I always when I go home, that's something that I enjoy. So, and we have like delicacies, like biscuits and cakes and things, but that I can
Mhm.
bake myself. But it's almost as if a braai, you have to be in South Africa to experience that whole thing around
Yeah,
braai. Um,
yeah, I can see that.
yeah, so you'll have to experience that when you're there.
Yeah, no, I can wait. It's on top of my list for sure.
Okay. Tobias, this was so great to talk to you.
It was fun. Yeah, thank you.
Do you ever come to Vienna?
Yeah, there's a great club called Porgy and Bess,
Oh yeah.
and I hope it works out I have a Europe tour in April, so it might
Oh,
happen in
okay.
April. So I let you know for sure.
Let me
Yeah.
know, definitely. Yeah.
And yeah, thank you for the invitation.
It's a great pleasure, and it was so lovely to talk to you.